Should Christian women be involved in politics? And why do so many good, holy, virtuous women feel that they want nothing to do with the political landscape? And what are the greatest consequences when women do not want to be involved in the political conversation? My name is January Donovan. I'm the founder of the Women's School, where I train women with skills to flourish in every arena of life, because when women are not flourishing, neither is our society. So let's dive right in. I was in a party once and I was talking with a lot of the parents. It was sort of a family party. And I had one of the dads kind of talked about politics and about life and about raising family. And so I remember asking him a question and say, we're living in a time, and this was about probably a couple years after the pandemic. And I remember talking to him about the reality of what can we do as Christians? What can we do as women? What can we do as families to fight this idea that we can no longer define what a woman is, and that our country was under attack, and that freedom was actually, something that was actually being taken away from us, and that we should really do something about it. And I remember his response was very telling to me, and I've pondered that response and I often thought, why did he respond that way? And his response was, January, just be a great mom. That is the best thing you can do to help our culture. Be a great mom, and I'm a mom of 8, and that is your contribution. And I remember thinking, that's it? I should just be a good mom and turn a blind eye to the reality that the world outside of me is burning, and that I should just do my own little part. And to me, that felt incredibly selfish. I felt like this idea of we are called to just take care of our family and our family alone. Let's not pay attention to the concerns of other people, what's happening in our communities, our neighborhood, our country, and just make sure you make enough money to take care of your family and that you take care of your children, and that's it. And I think that this mentality of just thinking and taking care of ourselves has really, I think, become a culprit of why so many women today feel that they should not be part of the political conversation. No, I'm not suggesting that every woman run for an office or that we should have fights about who's right and who's wrong. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting awareness. I'm suggesting speak up when it's necessary. I'm suggesting do our own homework. I'm suggesting don't just tolerate what's happening in our culture. We have to do our part and take ownership in what we can do to move forward what is true, good, and beautiful. And so that advice to me felt sort of complacent. It was a mediocre advice. I think it was a cop-out advice. Now, I have nothing against the guy. He was a really nice man. I haven't spoken to him since then. It was just a brief conversation, and there's a lot of people around. But I just feel like there's often this narrative that if we just be good moms and we just do our part to raise good children, then the rest of society will fall in line. And I just think that is a lie that we have been told and sold that I don't think is accurate logically. Think about it. If we don't do our part to be part of the narrative, to be part of the conversation, to be in Hollywood, to be in politics, to be in business, to be in the health industry, then we're just busy raising our family, which is so noble. I want to make sure that this does not get lost in my rant here. I consider myself a stay-home mom and also a business owner, and I think it's my primary duty to take care of my house. But not all of us are called to just take care of our home. Some of us are called in different seasons of our life to do more than I think what is demanded in our home life. And imagine if women just made sure they take care of their family and did the best they can, and was not a voice of reason in our communities, because women have a different, I would say, put in a different perspective. There is also something so valuable in creating a culture where women's voices are represented. And so if mothers are just focused on raising great children, which is so noble, but to have this almost limit that is all women should and are called to do, I think is an injustice to what women are capable of. Now, I'm not suggesting you compromise your family or go outside of what God is asking of you. I am suggesting that we have to discern what it is that God is asking of us. I am suggesting that Women today should be hyper aware of the state of our culture. Women today should just not take what our culture has given us and say, well, it's a David and Goliath situation in January. There's nothing I can do. There's always something that we can do. And it is easier for us to make excuses or be complacent, because it does feel daunting to feel like, what can one little tiny mom of 8 do to do something about the culture war? Well, we have seen the Moms of Liberty, we have seen the Loudoun County moms fight for justice for their children. Collectively, these moms became a voice of contribution that really protected and preserved our children's innocence. And so we have to stop assuming that this tiny version of ourselves that feel insignificant in the face of this massive crisis will not have an impact. I think that's an injustice to the way God designed women. And I think, secondly, the idea that we are just going to focus on our family and that is sufficient enough, I think is not an accurate assumption on our call. I don't think that it helps the political landscape. I think that we have to do our part and discern our part on what we should do as a woman and also in that particular season of our life. And so I want to play this clip for you, and I'm going to break it down because I do think that we need to pay attention to not just our needs, but the needs of the people around us, the needs of our country, the needs of our neighbor. Now, not everybody's going to be called to equal things, but that we do have a call, and no woman is outside of purpose. No woman is here just to get by. We are created by God to flourish. And I think that to flourish, we need to create an environment and a culture where we have an infrastructure that helps women flourish. But if we are not in the conversation to make the appropriate suggestion or elevate culture or be in the conversation that creates an environment where women are flourishing, then we're going to be stuck with a culture that denies us our value, which is really what's happening right now. So let's dive right in here.
You know, the enemy is involved in politics.
Yeah.
And if Christians stay out of it, then there's only one side that's running it, and it's darkness.
I remember my freshman year in college, I have never forgotten Father Dave Pravanka. And he said, the problem with darkness January is not, he said, didn't say January because it was a homily in my freshman year. I never forgot it. The problem with darkness is not darkness, but it's lack of light. And the reason why this really stood out to me, because I realized that every time I see darkness or evil or corruption, I realize, where are the good people? What is my role? How can I be better as a person so that light will be amidst the darkness? And it really is true. And I think that we can't complain about the state of our culture if women are not paying attention or not being part of the conversation. And I do think that the reason why so many women today feel that they don't want to be part of the cultural narrative is two things. Number one, it is mentally draining. What I mean by that, it's you feel as though there's not much you can do, and it's negative and it's exhausting. But part of the reason why it's mentally draining is because I think we have created a culture where women don't have the capacity for mental strength. We live in this emotionally, mentally triggered world where women lack the capacity to endure things that are challenging mentally. We have a rise of mental illness. 1 out of 5 women, last I checked, suffer from some form of anxiety and are taking antidepressant. And I think it's because we have an environment that does not build strong, resilient mindset, specifically for women. And part of the issue is that we've diluted the distinction between men and women. And so we can't really help women that's unique to women. We are not equipping women for who they are. We're trying to say men and women are equal and that everything has to be this equality and not this irreplaceable, unique human being that we can equip with real skills and real tools, which is, I think, the reason why women are not in politics, because of the conditioning that we have been sold. And secondly, I think we are far too overwhelmed because of the demands of our culture. And the reality is that the culture has dramatically shifted in terms of its demand. 100 years ago, we didn't get the mail as fast. We didn't have our cell phones, and there was very little distraction in comparison to now. And so women today have excess distraction that inhibit them from actually developing and acquiring skill after skill. And so most of us today are not prepared with the right skill necessary to manage our life, to manage every part of our life, our friendship, our marriages, our home life. We're just sort of trying to survive. Now, when you're in survival mode, you're not thinking, what can I do above and beyond to help promote good in our culture? What can I do above and beyond to see how we can change and rebuild culture? Most of the time, if we are overwhelmed because we're underskilled, the biggest byproduct of that is that we cannot think of strategies to actually bring light into the darkness. So what happens is that when we have a generation of tired, exhausted, and overwhelmed women, our culture will suffer because women lack the capacity necessary to actually fight for what is true, good, and beautiful. And so we have to look at the root cause of why we have an anxious generation and we have a culture that doesn't value men and women. And I think part of it is that we're not in the conversation. We are not part of the culture. We have kind of trained ourselves to almost turn a blind eye to culture and the news because it's exhausting. And instead, evil is growing because not necessarily at a fault of our own, but we're simply unaware. And it's simply because it is mentally, emotionally draining. But I do think that we have to start training women with a more resilient mindset, with greater emotional command. So we're not a victim to the things that are hard and that we don't walk away. We face it head on and we fight and we become strong in the midst of the challenges, and we don't perpetuate sort of this mentality of excuses and limiting beliefs that hold us back from doing actually what is noble and right for our culture.
And you can say, I don't want to get involved in politics as much as you want until your life is run by politicians.
And this is kind of almost what happened to me. To be honest, I have been in this, space of training women. I've taught women for more than 25 years. I teach skill-based training. It's what I've done. It's what I love. And I didn't necessarily want to be part of the political conversation. A, I didn't want rejection. B, I didn't want to sign up for being silenced or shadow banned, or, they want to cancel you, right? And I remember thinking, I just don't want to be part of it. I just want to do my job. I teach women for a living. I give them skill after skill. I give them hundreds of skills. But the reality is that I realized that I was part of the problem. Because I didn't want to say something, I enabled so much of the evil. Now, it took me a while to come to that realization. I really had to find enough strength in me to say, okay, I'm going to walk into the lion's den, knowing I'll be criticized, but also knowing that my courage could inspire other people to be more courageous about also their call to rebuild culture.
So we have to push back and realize, look, God led the Israelites out of Egypt so that they could freely worship him as he wanted.
That's amazing, because if you think about what happened is that, because I was not, or most of us are not in the political fight, it's almost as though we woke up and we realized, why do we have men in our sports? Why is it that now we're waking up to this transgender movement that denies the nature of women? Nothing against transgender women. I think that they ought to be respected and they deserve our utmost sort of respect as a human being. But it is wreaking havoc in our society right now. And I think that we have tolerated so much of it because we didn't know what to do about it. We were tired, overwhelmed, and exhausted. And it wasn't until that fight was in my doorstep, meaning I actually had to ask myself, January, if you don't fight this battle, you could get shut down for only allowing women in your school. And I remember thinking, oh, so now it's actually home. This fight is no longer out there, but it's in our home. And I remember thinking, wow, so what would happen if they force sort of this narrative in our school system? It was close to home. And so I really was forced to think about the consequence of my indifference and my silence. And I think most of us want to do something meaningful with our lives, and we just don't know where to begin. And we also don't see the ripple impact of our courage. And I think we need to think about it in the forefront of our mind and think, well, what would happen if I stayed silent or did not want to be part of politics? How would I go before God? And I think we need to start thinking that way and start thinking of eliminating sort of the scarcity mentality of, okay, I just want to take care of my family. That is it. I think that we're capable of far greater than that. I think God wants us to actually do more than that.
Right? We come from a long history as Christians of being liberated from an oppressive government by God.
I love that, actually. If you think about it, the lineage of a lot of Christian women, and I would say good, noble women, is because they had to fight for their freedom from some oppressor. And so it's actually part of the almost this human experience to not take for granted our God-given freedom, but to also fight and earn our freedom, but to also not tolerate oppressive government that suppress people's freedom. And I think that what we have here is quite remarkable, that we we actually can fight, because now we have a voice. We have a place in the marketplace. 150 years ago, there was no voice for women. And now we have a voice, but we might not know how to use it best. And I think what we need to do is to use it to defend ourselves from oppressive governments so that we don't
Why
walk
would he
into
have us do any different
crazy
nowadays? So when I see an oppressive
communism.
government, I'm going to call it out just like Moses did.
So when we see oppressive governments, we should call it out. So to me, the take-home point is that if you're not part of the politics, then why? And if you're not part of the politics, how can community grow around you? How can you hold people accountable to a higher standard of truth, of beauty, and of goodness if you're not part of the conversation? So the solution behind this is paying attention to the landscape of our culture, studying the news, not consuming it just for the sake of consuming it, but studying it means that we're trying to see where we can incorporate solutions in our life, and also focusing on I would say, discerning on your role on how to rebuild people in our culture, how to rebuild ourselves in our culture, and how to flourish as a woman in our community. And so I think that's what we need to do, is to focus on understanding the importance of giving ourselves the skills necessary to flourish, so that we don't walk into a culture where we can no longer define what a woman is. I think that we have a duty to do what is right and fight for our true freedom now more than ever in history. So I want to just encourage you to think outside of your current situation and really reimagine what it would be like if you were fulfilled, if you were happy, and if you were fully alive, and the impact that would have in your community and in our culture. Because at the end of the day, when women are flourishing, so will society. Again, my name is January Donovan. Sign up for more skill-based training on how to be a woman. You can click on the link below and subscribe and join our Art of Being a Woman free membership, where you get training and training and training for more real-life practical situations. Thank you. Go forth, and remember that what you offer this world, no one can.